Welcome, everyone. I'm Darshan Deshmukh, President of Procurability, and I'm joined by Bertrand Maltavane from Spend Matters, a division of Hackett Group. I got a chance to spend some time with Bertrand a couple of weeks ago in Vienna at a conference. Bertrand,
Yeah,
thanks for having being with me today to have this.
yeah, welcome. Happy to be here for an important topic and one that is close to my heart.
Yeah. So I think we're going to spend a little bit of time today to talk about sustainability. And when we think about sustainability, it's not a future goal. Like I remember the days when you're part of a CPO organization, we'll talk about ESG, talk about sustainability goals. How do they contribute to the good of the organization? Today, it's just the reality. It's just part and parcel of everything what we do. And procurement is uniquely positioned to accelerate the progress. And so whether it is delivering to the goals that the organization has set up, whether it's ESG goals, whether it's sustainability, whether it is diversity spend, like all the very dimensions of sustainability. So today, Bernard and I are going to kind of talk about some strategies that help procurement build the sustainable, resilient supply chains. And what are some of the challenges and what is driving some of these actions as we kind of go along, and what are some of the challenges associated with that within the world as well. If you have any questions, please go in and drop on those questions in the chat. We'll answer them either at the end of the event, or if we don't have time to actually answer those, we'll follow up afterwards. So let's dive in. So let's start, Bertrand. Let's start. Like, what are
Yeah.
some of the pressures and expectations? Why sustainability shifted so quickly from it used to be an optional item on the procurement agenda to more of an essential agenda as part of the supply chains? Any thoughts?
Mhm. For sure. And to be able to answer that question, I think it's good to start to what sustainability is.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the best way or the way I like to do it is to go back to the concept of the three Ps: people, planet, profit.
Yep.
Because sometimes when people think about sustainability, and we're going to talk a lot about those topics, people think about, the environment, society, workers, that kind of stuff. But there is also a component that is about profit. It's about the ability to continue to operate, because sustainability is about doing something and being able to continue doing it. So there is a component of sustainability that has to do with being able to operate, which is an important concept, because that means that everything that is risk related, operational risk, business continuity, is actually part of sustainability. And that being said, and linking back to risk, then I will elaborate on the other components, the people and the planet. But obviously, I don't know how to describe the last years we've went through between COVID and different geopolitical events. Let's say it's not been a quiet time. And procurement professional and supply chain professional have had quite a number of challenges to overcome to be able to get the goods coming and factories to operate. So there's obviously that component that accelerated the awareness of this broader sustainability agenda. Now, looking at people, planet, which is very often what people associate with the concept of sustainability, there are obviously also a certain number of, let's say, elements, pressures that do exist and that have made that it move from, let's say, being optional uh, to let's say essential. I won't say mandatory because we're going to talk about it, but anyway. And I think one of the key elements, it's really the concept of, like, as you said, Darshan, at the beginning, like procurement has a specific spot in organization. And I think at the end of the day, a long time ago, I wrote an article about procurement being here and existing to save the world. But at the end of the day, if you think of the shape of the world today, how it is today, it's all buying decisions that have shaped the world of today. And it's buying decision at home as a consumer, but also buying decisions at work as a professional buyer. And obviously, they shape the world. So in order to move the world in one direction, then obviously you've had different pressures put on people so that they actually move the needle. Um, we'll talk about it probably more in greater detail, but regulations, because at the end of the day, after many years, it's clear that just counting on people doing the right thing or the good thing to do, it's not enough. And the regulator have tried to create a level playing field because situation is different from one country to the other. So we've seen a rise in regulations, especially here in Europe, where I'm based, around that could be like human rights in the supply chain, carbon emissions, deforestation, water usage, that kind of stuff. Uh, and the idea is to say that to be able to access the market in the EU, you have to comply. And it's not just for companies operating in the EU, it's basically market access so that, yeah, as I said, level playing field. So the regulator has played a key role. As I said earlier, buying decisions, so the stakeholders and the customer pressure have also created an additional pressure for organization to buy better and be more conscious about how they operate and what they buy and who they buy from. In the same package, I would say investors, there are more and more, let's say, due diligence in the investor community is not just about profit and money and financials. It's also about how and such practices. And obviously, what has always existed also, it's the competitive advantage or the differentiation in terms of company trying to distinguish their product or their values by saying that we have this practice or that practice, right? So all of that combined, plus the nature of the world, the evolution of the world, the rising volatility, uncertainty, etc., has created some kind of perfect storm, I would say, where all this pressure combined moved the topic of sustainability, and again, I'm encompassing people, planet, and profit into that. From like nice to have to the term almost a must have.
And it's an interesting kind of time. So if you think about it, like a lot of the organizations think there is a cost associated with sustainability, and then they think that it's going to cost me more. But if you do it right, if the incentives are set right, and what we're seeing is, as an organization, you need to kind of set those tops down kind of directions. So there are organizations that will say, like, your certain portion of your bonus is tied to driving your overall sustainability agenda as an exec, and that drives a very different behavior. And it's not about greenwashing, or it's not about just doing it
No.
for the sake of it, but it's really driving the true change in how you do business, right? So some of the examples I kind of think about is, um, so I remember like maybe 20 years ago, when I started my career, and I was doing an assignment in China, and there was a multi-tier supply chain that we were
Uh-huh.
working with in the manufacturing side. And one of the tier four suppliers was in the news for using child labor. And we had a program that kind of did a bunch of like the surveys and making sure that like we are avoiding those types of scenarios. But for whatever reason, that didn't get caught and it got into the news. So there is a reputational risk associated with that as well. And I remember I got a note from the CPO, just as a forward from our CEO. It was just one line. It's a shame. Like, it was like just one
Yeah.
sentence,
Yeah.
and that's a very big motivation for a lot of organizations to make sure that you're doing the right thing. So it has a reputational risk around how do you build a sustainable business in the longer run as well, right? So
Yeah.
that's number one. Number two, I think I feel a lot of times we think about sustainability only on the environmental side of the business, but it's also tied to multidimensional, what those multidimensions are, right? And then
Of
creating a
course.
holistic program around it is what is very critical when you're building, why you are building a sustainability program within your overall supply chain as well.
Of course.
So it's not just tied to scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Yes, that's important and that drives your overall agenda, but the actions that are driven by it is something that is very critical. And then the third thing is, I think why it's starting to become mainstream, I feel, is the data is becoming a lot more easier to access. It's a lot more easier to access. So there's a lot of data. So processing and synthesis has become a lot more challenging. I get that. But at the same time, it used to be very difficult to get the data. And now I think the data is available to be able to drive that agenda across the multi-dimensional supply chain in general. So I think the expectation is starting to kind of rise up as we kind of think about what is procurement is supposed to drive as a sustainability agenda
Mhm.
as well.
Mhm.
So before we dig into the maybe the next conversation, maybe we can go to the audience and do a quick poll. Uh, if I may ask the team, so we'll put it in the chat. What is the biggest sustainability pressure that you are facing or your organization is facing right now? And let's give like 10 seconds. So if you can just type in your answers into the chat, and just want to kind of get a quick sense check from the audience as well.
And one thing I would like to add, Darshan, while people are thinking about this mini survey, the example you gave is a good one with China and some labor practices, that kind of stuff. I mean, people in the US have heard probably of the UFLPA, which is a regulation for specific region of China, etc. But I would sometimes, and especially around labor and human rights, people think, it's like, yeah, it's for those countries in Asia or here or there, and it's. But actually, at the end of the day, what is scary is that it happens closer to home than you think. I've been following some stories in the automotive sector in the US. There were some articles in the press last year, beginning of this year, I believe, around that. And it came back more recently where they actually sent back some people to Korea, that kind of stuff around immigration. So what I mean by that is that some of these things, sometimes you think, yeah, it's going to be a risk or a challenge for specific regions, specific type of suppliers. Well, that's not always true. Example, in the US, in the automotive sector, farming is another one. And there are also a lot of examples in Europe, like in the UK, with forced labor and that kind of stuff. So sometimes it's not about the tier 4 supplier based out of Asia. Sometimes it's closer to home. Sadly, I would say.
Absolutely. So as we're looking at like some of the answers that we got from the audience, I think the first one is not a surprise: regulations. Like we're going through a lot of upheaval in what the political landscape looks like and what is expected, what is not expected, and sometimes it's a pendulum, right? So when you think about what we're going through on the U.S. political landscape versus Europe political landscape, there is a bifurcation around how you want to kind of go after the overall agenda for ESG right now from a political landscape, and a lot of times it's politicized, right? But at the end of it, I think once you do like a long-term normalization of what the expectations would be, I don't think the expectations from the consumer, expectations from the investors, or expectations from the leadership is going to change significantly on what procurement is supposed to drive for ESG in general.
Yeah, and to complement what you just said, in Europe, as I'm based out of Europe, and I'm looking at everything that's happening here, and obviously in the US. So in the US, you already talked about it, but in Europe, we've seen the change too. Like 2 or 3 years ago, Germany was the first country to put a law in place, the Lieferkettengesetz. For if you have audience in Germany, they will see what I'm talking about. But due diligence in the supply chain around, basically company having to make sure that their suppliers, but also the supplier of the supplier, et cetera, had good practices, if I can say that, in terms of human rights and that kind of stuff. And then it moved to Europe at the EU level, let's say, and then like especially because the tariff discussion, the changes in the US, etc. Now there is a bit of a rollback, but the principles are there. And at the end of the day, I would say, when was it acceptable? Did it become acceptable that you can buy a product that is made by forced labor? Actually, it should never have been acceptable. And the second element, so there is this, this greater good aspects, and the second aspect, you use the word greenwashing. If a lot of companies are doing greenwashing, it's because it's bringing something to pretend to be green. Better prices, higher prices, that kind of stuff. So there is value in actually having the good practices. We'll explore some more in our discussion, because it's not just about premium prices. The ROI is broader than that. Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit more about the greenwashing. I want to kind of use a couple of examples on the how side, like how companies kind of used to do it, and now I think how do we want to go beyond that. So maybe let's just transition into a little bit more of a how conversation. So if procurement wants to make ESG as part of category management, strategic sourcing, and not just as like nice to have as an add-on, what are some of the things and the tactics the organizations and the leaders should use? Like any thoughts based on what you have seen in the industries?
Yeah, so I think it's like it's like these things, everything related to sustainability. So again, people, planet, and profit. The data points that are related to those three P's, you should embed them at every decision point in the
Mhm.
procurement process from S to P, if I can say that. In terms of like finding suppliers, vetting suppliers, awarding to suppliers, that kind of stuff. So those elements should be here because, and this is where for procurement it makes things sometimes a bit more complex. It's one of the many trade-offs you have to have
Yeah.
in mind when making a decision. So making the decision to work or not work with or work or not work with a supplier should address those elements in terms of what are the labor practices over there. And obviously, it all depends on what they are, what industry, etc. But at the least, you should have that in mind um, in terms of supplier qualification process, supplier rating process, or whatever you want to call it. And at the end of the day, when you decide to actually award business to a supplier and define the contract, those elements should be there too. So it's no longer cheapest price. We talked for a long time for low cost. Then we had the concept of total cost of ownership, TCO, then the concept of total value of ownership that is broader. So those elements would be in there in terms of like, I don't know, carbon emissions, for example. I think we'll talk about it a bit more, but like if I'm having in front of me two award decisions, then I should take into account carbon emissions in the product, in the fulfillment, et cetera, so that at the end of the day, I make a choice with all cards in hand. And I'm not saying about being perfect. It's all about incremental improvement. Sometimes the journey is long, so the first step is super important.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to all about the outcomes, right? A lot of
Yep.
times we get stuck into the activities that we need to do to hit
Yep.
our objectives, which is important. But that's basically how do you get to the outcomes? And if we keep ourselves focused on the outcomes as an extended organization, I think it's going to drive the results. Right? So one of the examples I always kind of see is when you think about driving sustainability agenda, and if you think about it in myopic your own organization only, a lot of times you might take very suboptimal decisions, and a lot of times it comes back down to like a product design or
Yep.
collaboration with the suppliers to kind of build something that is sustainable in the longer run. And an organizations miss the boat because they're so focused on their own narrow agenda. You have to think about it as a multi-tier supply chain to be able to drive that value. That's one. Goes back to the incentives. The incentives need to be transparently shared with each other when you are building this type of chain. So the example I always kind of think about is when you work with your tier one, tier two, tier three suppliers and share the benefits that you're driving by using a specific agenda. And if you have a little bit of transact versus very transactional relationship, you will be able to drive an improvement in your overall sustainability agenda as well. But that can reduce your waste, that can reduce your overall cost to be kind of shared so that you can kind of figure it out. What is your piece of the pie building like overall sustainable
For sure.
supply chain from an
For
internet
sure.
supply chain.
For sure.
I
For
think
sure.
the second piece I always kind of think about is we get myopically focused on activities, right? And one example that comes to mind is supplier diversity, right? And when we talked about greenwashing, it's kind of a loosely word of greenwashing, but trying to channel all of your suppliers through four or five large diverse suppliers was used to be a pretty common practice to hit your goals for. That's what is not the intent of the program. The program was to build and promote uh, diverse supply base that can produce and kind of build the overall ecosystem that is a lot more sustainable within the society, right? But I think what happened is it became such a big metric, like whatever and it took a long time to develop a supplier. So you would start to channel the spend with the four or five registered suppliers, and then you end up having uh, almost like you're greenwashing the overall process to hit your numbers, right? You're not really driving the true results. So I think really understanding what you're trying to drive, coming up with what you're implied that objective, and being able to deliver against that is very critical when it comes
Yeah.
to making sure you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you said is also important in terms of designing, the right KPIs and the right incentive, because every KPI can be, even with the best intention, sometimes the KPI design will create collateral damages, and
Yep.
that's super important to really think about what are we trying to achieve, the outcome, and not just the measure.
Yeah. So I think when you think about transparency of information
Mhm.
versus, I think it used to be procurement did a lot of policing of the activities. Like, are you doing audits? Are you doing what are you seeing any trends changes in how organizations are integrating that transparency in like the metrics in general? Like any examples there?
Yeah, for sure, because a lot of stuff like related to sustainability, there is nothing much you can do as a buyer.
Mhm.
It's all the supplier has to do something. And like, let's talk about carbon emissions.
Mhm.
Uh, Scope 3. Scope 3, it's all about the carbon hidden in your supply chain. So there's nothing you can do. I mean, yeah, you can switch suppliers, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, what you want is to work, collaborate with suppliers to find ways for him to reduce emission, maybe using better energy sources, look at, scrap or waste in a process, which at the end of the day is good because there would be less emissions. And if we take the example of less waste or scrap, then probably that will have an impact on price, right? On cost.
Yeah.
So this is where both go hand in hand. It's a win-win. And at the end of the day, I think it's also important to understand that what you're going to be doing collaboratively with the supplier is going to benefit obviously you, but also all the customers, etc. So I think such topic are really, really good topics for moving the needle in terms of relationship, not just buyers asking for and a one-way street. It's really collaborative, because at the end of the day, it's the supplier who's going to have to switch energy sources or do this or do that. And at the end of the day, it's going to be also good for his business, because it's something that he's going to be able to market and grow, and you can grow with him. So what we've seen a lot here, it's a change in mindset. It's a bit extreme, but approach in terms of collaboration, where it seems more natural to be more open to discuss those topics because they're maybe not related to IP or something like that, and collaborate and be more open on both sides around, let's put it on the table, let's find ways to improve, and let's do it.
Yeah. So and then I'm gonna switch to one of your favorite topics is on the digital side, which is I know that's one of your passions. Um, as the industry is maturing on the tools and the technology and all the innovations that are going on, uh, what are some of the tools that is making ESG like measurable? Like, and I think what is critical is, are these tools helping us have the right type of dialogue with the CEOs and the boardrooms when you're communicating, like what sort of ROI sustainability is
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
bringing to the table?
Well, that's a good point. And the short answer would be, well, not all tools allow that,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
some of them do.
Mhm.
And going back to what you said around diversity before, I would say the best solution are the one that will allow you to understand. So, there is that famous quote that it is, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So visibility is about thing, understanding where I am, my emissions, my supply base, or whatever you consider. But actually, the best is to do something from there. It's the insight and the action. So I would say the most mature tools, they will allow you to understand what you could be doing or what you should be doing. It could be guidance for reducing emissions. It could be some other suggestions. And I think the second element related to diversity, as you said earlier, are the tools that will allow you, and especially for the bond, to translate those improvements into, let's say, financial, the board language in terms of the financial impacts for you, for your organization, but also for the broader community. Like when you talk about diversity, you want diverse suppliers because, yeah, there are benefits usually with, innovation, branding, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, you want to nurture and make sure that the community around your company flourishes, because if society flourishes, people buy, etc., etc. And that's exactly what some tools do. They will help organization not only understand where they are, where they should be going, and how, but they also give the meat for the discussions with the board in terms of financials, and not just bottom line or top line, but also broader community.
Yeah. And I think the way I see is like when you build these CEO dashboards that are not just about savings, it's the revenue enablement, how you're going to help drive the overall product agenda. I think that becomes very critical as part of extended supply chain dashboard. And I think if we do that effectively with all the data that is available now and being able to harness that data in a consumable format, I think it becomes a very interesting conversation
Of course.
across the executive team in general.
Of course.
So as we kind of coming to like some of the last couple of comments, I want to kind of think about um, as we wrap up, like what is one piece of advice that you would like our audience to leave with? Like maybe just one quick one.
Um, I would say it's going to be 1.5 or 2, let's say, because they are related. It's to not wait to start. And as I said earlier, it's not about being perfect, having no carbon emission, no etc. It's about being better than before. So start, and don't shoot for perfection, just improvement and continuous improvement. It's a journey.
So that's like close to my heart. Like I'm a big believer in the rule of 37. So if like the rule of 37 is really if you do 1% incremental improvement every day, in a year you can drive 30x times improvement. Versus if you do big bang approach, a lot of degradation happens in the change. So like it's very critical, as you like rightfully said, like start small, don't try for perfection, try to strive for that 1% improvement every day, and that's going to do wonders when it comes to change in general. So that's an amazing advice. And I think, and I think I would say like if we think about like we started ESG and sustainability as a responsibility as a procurement organization, we can be a very strong catalyst in driving that agenda for the organization. Let's make sure that we gear ourselves for organizationally, people, process to be able to drive that value for the organization and become indispensable as part of the value delivery organization. So, Bernard, thank you very much for joining me and sharing your insights for today. And if you'd like to learn more, you can connect with us on LinkedIn. And you can also sign up to receive Procurability Insights. We do have one more event coming up Wednesday, November 19th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, where our CEO, Conrad Snower, is joined by Omid Gamimi, President of PSCM Institute, where they will talk about procurement pivot, redefining success through performance outcomes. So they will focus more on how procurement is changing from a performance outcomes perspective, like the driving the value and success for the organization. We'll drop in the registration link in the chat. So thanks again for joining this conversation. And Bernard, thanks a lot for joining me today.
You're welcome, Ashwin. Important topic, and get started.
Yeah.
The first step.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.